State and Local is back after a hiatus, and I'm very pleased today to have one of the candidates for the 9th Norfolk District running for representative. I should just mention that his opponent was offered offer to come on the show but declined. So I have Steve Teehan here with me today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Anne-Marie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I'm just curious. I've got to ask you about being the chief of staff for Timilty.
Yes.
Was that for Joe?
That was for Walter Timilty, Joe's nephew.
Oh, all right.
Yes.
How in the world did you get that job? That sounds like a pretty good job.
Sure. Yeah. It was the greatest learning experience of my life, and it was one of the greatest jobs I've ever had. So I was born and raised here in the district. I'm from Medfield. And I just sort of grew up always being interested in public policy and politics and working on a lot of local political campaigns. And so one of the campaigns that I had worked on was for James Timilty, who was a state senator, and did a lot of work with him. And then I went to college. I got a degree in political science.
Oh, you did?
Yes. Yeah.
Where did you go?
St. Michael's College up in Vermont.
Oh, that's a pretty good place.
Yeah, yes. And so I loved it up there. But so I got the degree in political science, and then I just applied for the position with, at the time, he was Representative Walter Timilty, and now he's in the Senate. But he hired me, and for 2.5 years, I ran his office up at the State House.
Wow. You know, I taught the Timilty, that's a big family in Boston, because
Yes.
when I started teaching in Boston, I was at the Timilty School.
Oh, wow.
And then like 30-some years later, one of the Timilty married to a Timilty, showed up at another school where I was working.
Mm-hmm.
So now this was Walter.
Yes.
For whom you worked. Now I noticed. See, this explains everything, because I noticed in something that I read that you were doing writing legislation and analyzing budgets, and I thought, this guy, this carpentry, how in the world was he trained? So now this explains it.
Yes.
And now, so you know your way around up on Beacon Hill.
Yes, yeah.
So that should be a big plus for you.
Absolutely. I think that, there's no environment, that prepares you for the State House. And working up in Beacon Hill and working with other state legislators, and really learning what the job of a state representative is. And while I was working for Walter, essentially a state representative is two things. About 40% of the job is actually filing, writing legislation, voting on it, working it through the committee process, advocating for it in hearings. That's about 40% of the job. The other 60% of the job is akin to being a social worker for your entire district.
Oh, yes, right.
And doing absolutely anything you can for the people that you represent, which is why I always say, in order to be an effective state representative, you got to be the most accessible person in your community, and you got to be an advocate for whatever the folks in your district need. It's connecting them with state resources, helping them to get jobs, and just doing all of that one-on-one constituent service work.
Now, when Walter Timilty was out doing that, did you often go with him?
Yes.
On some of those visits and on his office hours or anything like that?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So I did everything with Walter, and so that meant being at the State House for 8 hours a day, fielding constituent calls and working on legislation. And then after 5 o'clock, it meant going out to the district and meeting with constituents, going to local events, going to Eagle Scout Court of Honors and making sure that we're honoring our Eagle Scouts and our veterans and our public safety officials. So it's definitely not a 9-to-5 job. It's more than a full-time job. It was at least between 60 and 80 hours a week every week, and you're working 8 hours at the State House, and then nights and weekends you're out meeting with constituents.
Now, was that a paid job for you?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was a full-time staff position.
So tell me about writing legislation. One of the things I've often wondered is it seems like the style that they're written in is very uniform. So does somebody else take what you write and then they rewrite it in that sort of language that the voters actually see?
Sure. So the way it usually works is so you'll be usually contacted by a constituent, or you'll be working with the folks in your district trying to create laws that are going to improve the lives of the people that you work for. And so it usually starts with an idea. This is what we want to do. This is the change that we want to create. And then it does have to be written in such a way that you got to be careful about saying may where it should say shall, and things like that. And you work with House Counsel on coming out with the specific legalese, the specific language that the law is written in, so that it is impregnable.
So is what you write the final thing that people actually read? Because what I was asking about, I probably wasn't clear, is the style is very uniform from one piece of legislation to the other. And I often wondered if somebody came in and went through those and edited them for style. No?
It's not so much for...
do you know what I'm asking?
So why exactly is it written the way that it's written?
Yeah, I don't. They all seem. Everything seems to be in a very uniform type of style, and I wondered if that was something that was done by an agency, or you all knew exactly what type of language to use.
Yeah, it's done by a lot of the times House Counsel and the legislators themselves to have it in what's often considered legal boilerplate, so that the laws are written in such a way that they can actually be implemented and put into effect effectively, and it just has to be worded very specifically, especially when you're dealing with the law.
So would you write it and then Timothy would look at it later, or how did that work?
So it was a combination all the time. Walter would draft up the legislation that he wanted, the way he wanted it to, what we were trying to do for folks. He would give me a draft, I would go over it. Then we would send that draft to House Counsel. They would go over that and they would vet it as well. It would come back to us. We would go over it. We'd discuss it with the folks in the district that we were writing it for, and then it would get filed as a bill.
And it works the same way as in Congress. In other words, it goes from the House to the Senate and back.
Exactly. Yes.
Now, so that was a great job to get. Were you right out of college, or had you been doing other things in the meantime?
So I started working on political campaigns when I was 6 years old.
Yeah. Oh, and what did you do? Hold signs?
So it was Congressman Joe Moakley, who was a congressman here in Massachusetts for many, many years. And in 1996, he had an opponent in Medfield. And so I was born and raised in Medfield. I was living in Medfield, and my father was involved with the campaign. So I would go out door knocking with Joe and my father in Medfield, and we would knock on doors and we would talk to voters. And that was sort of where I got my start. And then from 6 years old on, I basically spent every other summer working on some political campaign or other. I always say I've never played a round of golf in my life, because I've spent every summer working on some political campaign.
So then you know a number of people at the State House.
Yes, and I'm very fortunate to have been endorsed by 7 sitting state legislators.
So who are they?
Representative Jim Hawkins, Representative Meg Kilcoyne, Representative Ted Phillips, Senator Timothy, of course, Senator Feeney, and Representative Denise Garlick, and several others as well, and Representative John Rogers from Norwood.
But is Betty Poirier still up there, or has she retired?
I believe she's retired.
Okay, because I knew Betty.
Sure.
Now as far as the budget analysis, what does that involve?
So the budget process up on Beacon Hill, it's a very specific and involved process. You have budget week in the House of Representatives.
Really?
And in the Senate, yes. And it's just one long week of hammering out the House's version of the state budget. And so all the representatives, they get together. Everybody has their specific budget priorities. And so they file their budget priorities, and it's thousands. And then they just spend the entire week advocating on behalf of their budget priorities and trying to get it into the final version of the House budget. And they're usually in a full formal session for essentially the entire week, and constantly getting called down to the chamber to vote on this amendment and that amendment, and it just goes on like that.
Do you have a zero-based budget?
A zero-based budget?
Yes. In other words, when you do the budget each year, do you start sort of from zero, or are you adding on to what was already given to each agency or
So,
or
so
group?
it depends. There's always a there's always a revenue prediction for the year, and it's based around that. And then you're constantly advocating on behalf of whatever your priorities are. And if it's this specific group, we need more funding for mental health services in the Commonwealth, and we funded it at this last year. I think that we should fund it this amount this year, and advocating on behalf of each of these specific line items like that.
So you don't make an assumption from zero and look at the whole thing and say, well, because when you're adding on to what's already there, there's a lot of, and the money goes up and up and up.
If the revenue projections for the next year are going up. If they're not, then it's different.
Okay. I know, because we had a bit of a flap here in Norfolk about one of the selectmen wanted to do a zero, of course very small compared to what, a zero-based budget, and start from zero and see, well, look at everything, and it was a lot of opposition to that. So now, speaking of funding, your opponent had said that he was concerned about transparency of state funding. Did you feel there's an issue with that? What is your, because he didn't make any specifics, and I was wondering what you could tell us about that, if you feel there's where there can be a problem with transparency.
Sure.
Or do you think there is even an issue with?
I mean, I think that it's definitely important that the legislature and that the individual representatives are communicating everything that they're doing. And I think it's also just very important that you're available to your constituents to answer any and all questions that they may have about what's going on Beacon Hill. I think that that's essential.
Is there ever an issue? Is there any way that that the state knows if the money that's gone from the state to a town, that money was actually used for what it was intended for?
So when money is going to a town,
that's where I think there's an issue with transparency.
Sure, it's procured in what's called the Chapter 90 funding, and there's a funding formula within the state budget that essentially doles out. Each town gets a certain amount in funding from the state, and like I said, it's done by formula. And then once it's given to the municipality, it's up to the municipality to spend that funding as it sees fit.
So it's not necessarily earmarked?
Not by the legislator.
Oh, really? Okay. So it's just money that's given, and then the town can do with it as it pleases?
Yes, at that point the municipal government is able to.
Really? So there's no, I see. So there's no, I mean, unless, are there grants that are written by towns for state money?
So municipalities also apply for state grants as well to receive, specific state funding for a specific project.
Now, what do you know about the I can't think of the word now, because the prison was supposed to get a mitigation fund.
Yeah, prison mitigation money.
Is that still do you happen to know, is that still coming forward? Because it seemed to me they had stopped. I mean, even before all this, the COVID issues.
Yeah. That's one of those things that you just have to advocate for in the legislature. You got to make that a budget priority, and you got to speak to the Speaker of the House and the Chair of Ways and Means, and you got to say that this is a major priority for my district, and you got to work with the other regional legislators in securing that money. So
how long ago was it that you had this job at the State House?
So I worked at the State House. I left in 2016, the fall of 2016.
Oh, so it's been a while then.
It's been a few years.
Yeah. So a lot of these current issues you might not be entirely up on, other than as a citizen reading the papers and.
Yeah, sure. I just follow along with everything the same way everybody else does.
So, what would you like? Is there something you'd like to do differently than Sean Dooley did? What are your plans for what kind of a state rep you would be, or what you think would be important for you to work on?
I think in terms of policy, I think that the biggest priority for me is definitely expanding our senior citizen tax credits. I think that in the towns that we live in, property taxes are constantly going up and up and up, and we have our senior citizens, a lot of them are on a fixed income, and they have difficulty staying in their homes and staying in the towns where they've lived for decades. And I think the state needs to mitigate that and provide senior citizen tax credits so that we can retain our seniors, who are some of the most important members of our community.
So would that involve a vetting of this in terms of how much money the seniors actually have? Would there be some sort of a sliding scale, or would there be, some kind of in other words, it would not be available to people who have certain income or certain assets? Do you think that's the way it would go?
Yes, exactly, and that's the way that it exists currently. But I think that the way it is, it's just not keeping with what people have in terms of assets and income in the area, which is why I think we need to expand the threshold so that it can really have a positive impact on the folks that are living here in Norfolk and the rest of the 9th Norfolk District.
How does it work now?
So your home has to be worth a certain amount, or has to be worth below a certain amount. I think the threshold is around $800,000.
Oh, really?
Yes. And there's also a formula having to do with your water bill and your local property taxes. And if it reaches a certain amount of what your income is, then the senior citizen the senior circuit breaker tax credit kicks in, and you're able to write that off on your state taxes. Or if it's more than that, you can actually get a refund from the state. And it's a fantastic program.
I never heard about this.
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic.
But I'm obviously a senior. I didn't know anything. I've never had no idea that was operant. I didn't know anything about that.
And it's also one of the other things that I'm an advocate for is just increasing funding to our local senior centers and making sure that senior citizens have these resources and that they can go and learn about these sorts of things. They're going to allow them to stay here in our community.
Now, how does that work? How much money goes into the senior centers from the state as opposed to from the town?
So it depends. And a lot of that is done by formula as well.
Based on the average income in the town, or?
No, there are a number of factors that go into deciding the specific amount. But I feel that we just need to continue advocating to increase the amount that we are giving to our local senior citizens in the state budget.
And so you don't know what the percentage is. So you're saying it's different for each town?
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
So say a lower income town would get more from the state for their senior center.
Possibly, yeah.
Because I've often wondered, the one I go to the one in Medfield. It's just great over. They've done a great job over there.
Yes. Yeah, they're fantastic over there. We've got a phenomenal senior center, and the people that work there are just unbelievable.
They really are. Yeah. I had wondered if the quality of the decor and the building itself. I'd wondered how much it had to do with money that came in from Medfield. Mm-hmm. As opposed to ours here, others that you see. Ours needs some doing over. I mean, Walpole has a relatively new one. I think Franklin does also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of the actual building of that, the physical building itself, is going to come from the municipality, and a lot of times they have to approve a tax override or something like that in order to make the new building.
Oh, the physical building of it?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So another thing that you mentioned that you were concerned about was the drug issues now, the drug problems.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think that substance abuse is an issue that affects everybody in the Commonwealth. Everybody knows somebody that has battled with substance abuse. And being in the Carpenters Union, we have a very involved process of helping folks that are in recovery, getting them into recovery, not writing them off, but giving them the care that they need in order to get better and continue to be productive members of our society. And I think that the Commonwealth absolutely needs to be providing funding to, like we have the SAFE Coalition right here in Norfolk. Mm-hmm. And they provide amazing services for folks and also the family of folks that are suffering from addiction.
That's right here in town. I'm not exactly sure where it is. I think it's down off Pond Street.
Yeah. Somewhere
down there. So, given your concern about that, what about the impact of the open border and all the drugs that are coming through there now?
I think that's a federal issue. That's something that the federal government is dealing with. And all we can do here in the Commonwealth is help our citizens and the people that are suffering from addiction issues.
But it's my understanding there's an awful lot of coming in. Some of the cartels that are doing the human trafficking. A lot of those people that they bring across, if they don't have enough money, then they are going to be drug mules, or they're going to be. I mean, and these people are going all over the United States. So while you're right, it is a federal issue, it becomes a state issue when people go into these different states and neighborhoods and start marketing these drugs.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously we need to do, and that's why I strongly back the police, and I'm a big public safety advocate. And I'm fortunate also to have been endorsed by the Massachusetts Coalition of Police.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yep. And also the professional firefighters of Massachusetts that are doing a lot to, they're the first responders on the scene whenever there is an overdose or something like that.
Now, what was it about you that you acquired that endorsement? Because they tend to endorse usually Republicans, don't they, the police?
So they support those who support them, and I support our local police officers, and I'm very proud to have their support. Yeah.
Oh well, yes, I should think so. And what about the fire? How did you link in with them?
So when I was up at the State House, actually, when I was working for Walter Timothy, we were always advocating on behalf of our local firefighters. And that's definitely something that's a major priority of mine. These are the men and women that are keeping us safe in our communities, and we need to be supporting them and giving them the resources that they need to keep us safe, but also make sure that they're getting home safely at the end of the day and coming home to their families.
Do you think that the state will do anything to facilitate the recruitment of police, because that's fallen way off? I mean, that's a real serious problem because of the way the police have been treated and blamed, and so people either are taking early retirement or they just don't want to be a policeman anymore.
Sure, yeah. I think that we absolutely need to be doing something to recruit more police officers, and also just showing them the respect that they deserve. It's a very difficult job. I've got a lot of friends and family that are police officers. It's an incredibly difficult job. It really is a vocation, and it's important that they get the support that they need.
I have another question. What do you think well, of course, I guess this is a city issue. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the state, but I'm just wondering if it does. They have that terrible situation that they call mass and Cass in Boston. Do you think the state will, or do you happen to know if the state's going to get involved in any of that? Because I understand Mayor Wu is trying to move them, and I guess she's not having much success with that. Where does the state come in on something like that?
I'm not sure that the state has any plans on coming in on something like that. I think a lot of times it is good to let local governments, sort of self-determine exactly how they want to handle certain situations.
So I guess I think I cut you off. So what do you think you would do differently than the way Dooley functioned as a state rep? Will you be different in any way, or is there anything that you feel like you could improve on what you had seen as when he was state rep?
Sure. I think I would just do what I do best, which is just being as accessible as possible to everyone in the community. And we've been campaigning here since February. And in that time, I've knocked on over 2,000 doors.
Really?
Yes, yeah.
How does that go, knocking? I've done it a little bit. How does that go? It seems like it's kind of a thankless task. I mean, I realize you can leave literature, but do people actually come to the doors? I mean, do you go at night? Do you go during the day, or?
So I've been working as a carpenter, swinging a hammer 8 hours a day and banging on doors, at night and on the weekends.
Because you have a regular 9-to-5 job, don't you?
I was working
more or less. I mean.
Yeah, 6 to 3, 6 to 2:30. And I would go out knocking doors afterwards and on the weekends. And over the last couple of weeks, I've been knocking doors all day, every day. And you get folks that are not home, and that's fine. But I really do believe that if you want to work for people, you got to go to their house and you got to ask them for the privilege. Yeah.
Now, when we were doing it, there was a list of Republican voters and independents that we used. Are you doing that as well? Are you using a Democrat list and an independent list to decide where you go?
Yes, yeah. You definitely, you always target the, good voters, and just reach out to as many folks as you can.
Is the state is anyone helping you out with your funds? Is there any I mean, other than donors, does the party have any kind of money that they give to to hopefuls, to candidates, like the national parties do?
Sure,
Do
yeah. Sometimes I haven't received any money from the state party, but I'm also in the middle of a primary right
That's
now.
right. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
So yeah, it's possible that after the primary, if I am the nominee, that the state party can make some sort of a donation if they choose to.
So that's going to be, you said September 2nd?
September 6th.
6th. And
Yes,
then the
day after Labor Day.
And then when is the regular, the 8th?
November 8th.
November 8th.
Yes, November 8th.
Now, are there any coffees planned that you could let people know about, or times that people are going to have for you?
So I'm having a meet and greet in Medfield on this coming Saturday. It's at a private residence in Medfield. And beyond that, I found that the most effective way to meet and greet with people is by knocking doors and just going out there every day and talking to folks. And I have great conversations every day with voters throughout the entire district.
And you're doing a mailing?
Yes, yep. And then, of course...
That's a costly venture, isn't it?
Sure,
because you've
yeah.
got to have the thing made up and the photographs and the postage and everything.
Yes, yeah, it is.
So, but when are those going to go out? Later on?
So yes, I mean, some of them have already started coming out. It's important that you reach people and let them know what your priorities are and why you're running. And sending them a piece of mail is great. In addition to going and personally speaking with them and giving them your literature, and I always make sure that everyone that I speak to has my cell phone number too, so they can call me anytime if they ever have any questions, if there's ever anything I can do for them. Your
predecessor used to send these humongous things out, and I used to think to myself, isn't there anything better to spend? I mean, is it going to really make a difference if it's 8 by 10 or bigger? And there's other ways to spend the money. I always, so I would. Have you had all those things made up yet, or are you still working on it?
So yeah, we're definitely in the process of. I've had some things made up, and we're in the process of having other things made up. And it's it's really about just making sure that you're getting people's attention, and that they're going to be able to see it and see why you're running, and see why you think that you would be in the best position to represent them in the House of Representatives.
Will you mention your education? Because oftentimes that's not mentioned, and I mean, in your case, I think that would be important.
Sure, yeah, I've mentioned, on my website, my education, my degree in political science, and I also talk a lot about my life experience. Having not only worked in the State House, but also being, a commercial carpenter working construction. I think that makes me uniquely qualified to represent the working families of this district.
Exactly. Now, what is your website?
SteveTeehan.com.
I'm sorry, I talked over you.
I'm sorry, SteveTeehan.com.
Okay, so people go there, and anything will be, any times that you're going to have, you'll be posting that on the website. Well, so we've got it, and it's been very interesting talking to you. And so thank you very much for watching State and Local. I'm Anne-Marie Battistone. This is Norfolk Public Access. My guest has been Steve Teehan. He's running in the 9th Norfolk District for state rep, to be our state rep. And I'll just close with saying, you can be a political activist when you go to vote. So thanks very much for watching. I'm Anne-Marie Battistone.